One of the easiest ways to improve your running is to focus on mental health. And the relationship between running and mental health can be complicated. And that's why I have an expert with me here today to tackle this very topic. Welcome to episode 248 on the Healthy Runner podcast, where we help you get stronger, run faster, and enjoy lifelong injury-free running. Today, my guest is Sarah Strong, who is a mental health therapist and performance coach. Sarah is a licensed clinical social worker, certified run coach, accomplished ultra runner, and probably most importantly to her, a mom. And she is passionate about helping athletes prioritize mental health and mental training as much as physical health and training. Well, that sounds super exciting. Sarah, thank you so much for accepting my invite to come on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you today.
So am I. This is always an area that we as runners can improve upon. And, just my background coming from a physical therapist standpoint, like that is the thing I always focused on is the physical, and still until I learned about starting to, focus more on the mental side of it. And here at Spark Healthy Runner, we have like 6 steps to growing in a runner journey. And, the first step of that is mindset. And that's kind of like the mindset bucket that we talk about in addition to strength training, running, nutrition, recovery, and then race strategy. And this is an area that I find so many runners need help in. And that's why I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today, because you are going to be filling our mental strategy bucket up today with some goodies. Just so you guys know, the things that Sarah is going to really touch upon during today, or things you're going to learn about, is, does running actually help with mental health? Is running a form of therapy? You'll hear many runners say, running is my therapy. I said that in the past as well. Is really, how does stress affect a runner's body? How do we manage stress and mitigate negative impacts? Examples of helpful and unhelpful coping strategies for stress. And then self-care for mental health. And what is it? And how do we get it to stick, right? How could we be consistent with it? And here on the show, Sarah, we would start with a little dynamic warm up like we would for our runs here. So if you could just share, where you call home and give us a little bit more backstory on how you've gotten to this point in your career journey.
Yeah. So I'm here in Colorado. I've been in the Denver, Boulder area for the last 10 years. And it's, so I've run really most of my life, I would say. I come from a big family of athletes, and running was just like a thing that everybody always did. But it was just a thing I did, right? I didn't really have like a relationship with it or really consider myself a runner until probably I moved here in Colorado, had my kids, and needed some time to myself or time with other moms. And I found at the time it was Moms Run This Town, which I think is now She Runs This Town, and joined a group of other moms and women who were running. And one that got me out on trails, which has been life-changing. I love being out on trails, and that really, that just connected me with a different experience with running. And then 2, a lot of these women were doing really cool things, but they were doing these chill weekend runs with all these other women. And they would casually be talking about the Ironman they were training for, the 50 miler. And it really helped me to understand that you could do cool things and do a nice, easy Saturday run, that you didn't have to push yourself all the time. And it started to make those kinds of goals become, possible to me, I would say. So that really, knowing those women, seeing what they could do, and then that self-belief it created in me really got me into running. And then I started doing some ultras on my own and hired a coach. And that really helped me begin to take care of myself, that holistic approach, what you're talking about, all of these, the nutrition piece, the taking care of my sleep and my mind, my mindset, and pushing myself physically and caring for myself physically. And once I began to really do that, I then was able to run 100 miles and had my first podium finishes and things like that. And so that really just transformed my relationship with running and how I approach it. And then I've now wanted to tell everybody about that. And so I've used my social work background. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've had, I've been an LCSW for 10 years. So took that background, and then now I'm a running coach, and now I'm taking that expertise and that experience and trying to share that message with everybody.
I love it. Yeah. So you're sharing your passion that you kind of learned through your personal journey, and then combining your expertise in mental health and combining that for the running community. And yeah, it sounds like you really embrace that running doesn't need to like suck all the time, and it's not like a form of punishment, and it is attainable. And I just love how you phrased of taking care of yourself, and like once you started doing that, you noticed like the improvement. And I think many runners can relate to that. Or if someone's listening to this right now and you've been banging your head against the wall and trying to keep doing the hard training plans, and you're wondering why you're not getting faster, why you're not hitting your time goals, perhaps you might learn a thing or two today in learning how to actually take care of yourself, so you can be able to actually progress in your running journey. So I love that. So you've done 100 miler. Is that like, is ultras your thing now? Is that kind of what you're currently into in terms of like running for competitive or challenging yourself?
Yes, I would. So I have just finished. I am in the midst of an injury recovery. So I have not run for a big stretch of time, and I'm coming back right now. So right now I'm not doing much of anything other than focusing on recovery, which is great. But yeah, I love the long distance stuff. I love being out on trails, especially being able to like run at night is a really cool experience. So probably as long as my body will let me, I will stick to those long distances if I can.
Nice, very nice. And yeah, I've said this many times on the show before. Right now, I'm kind of taking the baby steps, I guess, to trail running, where I went from running in like busy city streets to running in a paved rails to trail, where I'm surrounded by trees on both sides. So I feel like I'm in nature. There's deer who cross by me. Saw a black bear once. So I feel like I'm in the wilderness. It's not trail running, but I'm kind of taking baby steps there. But I just hear from so many folks who have gone into trail running that they see such great value out of it, and just mentally, right, and just being able to have that like a whole new world and different aspect of running. And we've done a couple of different episodes on trail running, and it does require different training and special considerations. But it sounds like that's been where your passion has been. And yeah, no, I just love hearing that from many folks.
I think what's been helpful, especially for me, is it's harder to be attached to your time when you're out on trails. There's such variance in my runs from day to day to day, right? If it's rocky terrain, if it's steep terrain, whatever it is, if it's snowed, if it's muddy, all of those things are going to really impact my time. Whereas with road running, I think you have an expectation around your time, and it can be harder to let go of it when there's variance, because you think, well, I do this route all the time. It should be about the same, give or take a few seconds per mile. And with trail running, it'd be 2 minutes per mile difference on Wednesday and Saturday, right? And I think road running, that's harder to have. And so I think it really helped me with trail running to let go of time, because it really doesn't matter. I couldn't tell you how fast I'm going to run if I wanted to, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It definitely releases some of that pressure that a lot of runners put on themselves. Speaking of pressure on ourselves, let's start with kind of the basics here of, does running help with mental health? I know that might sound like a silly question, because I hope at this point, most people listening to this has seen some of these mental health benefits, but does it actually help our mental health, or do we just like think it does?
Yeah, so moderate running absolutely is a fantastic tool for mental health. Like you said, most people can have experienced a mood boost from going for a run, kind of feeling like you don't want to get out the door, kind of dragging, and then you get out and you feel great when you come back, right? It releases endorphins and dopamine, serotonin. It gets all those happy things flowing in our brain. And it can also connect us with other people. It builds confidence. Very good for mental health. Gets you in your body. It can be a great time to process things and think through things, which is really important for us to do. So for all of those reasons, it can be good for your mental health. It's also true that when we start training for races and maybe we're feeling a lot of pressure around our workouts, or we have those workouts that maybe aren't as fast as we'd hope they'd be, or if we're running not moderate and we're running really fast or really hard or really long, those runs actually are not good for our mental health. They're just putting stress on us and not relieving stress. So it's not a yes or no. It depends on how we're using the run and what stress we're bringing into the run to start with.
Okay. So, yeah, you've kind of mentioned some of those benefits. And I think, we can all think about those times where we did feel great during a run and we've had like that dopamine hit. And I like to call them like the mental clearing miles, where I just feel like my mind is clear, right? Like after going for a run, you can it's like meditative in a way. Especially I find if you are doing it, not listening to music or listening to a podcast, where you are out there just kind of like a moving meditation. And I find that that's mental clearing. But that's interesting that you also said that sometimes it could be more mental stress. And okay, so it kind of depends, is what I'm hearing there, right? Where it will
and
impact
not just
people differently.
And not just mental stress, but it could be physiological stress, right? Like cortisol and adrenaline stress hormones are released when we run. And if we're running hard and long, we're releasing more stress hormones. So if you had a super stressful day at work and then you run really hard because you want to blow off whatever it was, you might actually just be compounding that and pouring stress. And then you've like run after work and like really hard. And now you've got those stress hormones that make it hard to fall asleep. And now maybe you're not sleeping as well. Right. And so it's not just a mental impact, but it's the whole piece with stress. That's both mental and physical.
Okay, that makes sense. And it's kind of like the phrase that we use, like stress is stress, right? So like for someone who is doing hard training, that we need to take into considerations what's going on in their personal life in terms of stress, and compounding that, like you said, adding that with hard training. If you're doing hard speed work, or if you're peaking in your marathon training, then that is going to impact how the body recovers. That is going to impact how you feel, and that might impact like performance on race day.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yep. Gotcha. So is running a form of therapy?
So for all of those reasons, right? So no, running is not therapy. And like I said, it is a fantastic tool for your mental health. I mean, I think I highlighted some concerns there because I think it's important that we not rely on running for our mental health. But yes, like I said, all of those reasons, running is really good for our mental health, but it's not therapy, because therapy is working with a trained professional who can diagnose mental illness, who can treat mental illness. Therapy is about having an objective outside party helping you get a different perspective. So you might process through some things on your own when you run. That's not the same thing as talking with a trained professional who might notice some patterns or might be able to challenge some beliefs that they're hearing, right? And it sounds maybe like it doesn't matter. It's just a word. We can just say running is therapy. It's helpful for my mental health. Isn't that the same thing? And the reason that it matters is because when we say running is my therapy, maybe somebody who's struggling thinks running should be enough. And if they just run, that should take care of things. Or with some of the things we were talking about before, where running is actually exacerbating mental health issues. It's adding stress. It's exacerbating some of those false beliefs and things like that. It's definitely not therapy, right? It's actually holding somebody back. So I think it really matters. It hurts a little bit the stigma around mental health when we say running is therapy, because therapy actually is a bit more and requires a bit more nuance and professional expertise than running does.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that and clarifying that, because that is something that I'm pretty sure I used to say at the beginning of my running journey until I learned better, and that it does discredit, right, like what you do from a mental health standpoint as a professional, but then also it might make others feel that, oh, if you have this problem, just go for a run. Like running will fix it. Like that's what I do. I'm a runner, just go for a run. I always feel better after a run. And it's because you're not running that you feel this way, right? Like, so I like that you highlighted that. And that's why I like to call it just mind clearing miles now, where, I feel like my mind is a little more clear after a run. So thank you for clarifying that, because I did want to bring that up, because I will hear people still use that phrase, that running is my therapy, or I run to run the crazy off, or like I run right for my mental health, right? Like just phrases like that. And I think we do need to be careful, and we need to realize that, number one, like if someone does really truly need help, running is not going to right, like fix that. And I agree that it does downplay mental health disorders, and people think that it's a quick fix, and a lot of times it's not, right? And that's why it is a form of healthcare that is needed within our society. So you mentioned kind of the negative impacts, perhaps, of running as it relates to really the mind, the body. Is that really related to stress, and like how stress affects a runner's body? And you kind of started talking about that, I think, with cortisol, but what is that exact process, and in how stress does affect our bodies?
Yes, I think primarily what I'm talking about is stress, and maybe sometimes things like negative self-belief, or perfectionism, competition with friends. Those can be things that maybe aren't stress related, but could be tangential mental health challenges related to running, right? But typically the thing that I'm really wanting, I think, everybody to be paying attention to is the relationship between stress and running and mental health, right? So stress is a great thing. We want stress. Stress is how we grow our muscles, how we increase our endurance, how we challenge ourselves, right? If you're not stressing yourself, you're not growing, you're not changing. So we want stress, but there is a point where we can get too much stress. And if we get too much stress, we no longer are getting adaptations, right? That's when we can get injured or get burnt out. We cannot handle the amount of stress coming in. So I love the imagery of a bucket, like the stress bucket, and everything that you do, physical, mental, or emotional, can add stress to the stress bucket. So you have a bad day at work, you're pouring stress in the bucket. You don't sleep well, you pour stress in the bucket. You forget to eat before your run, you're pouring stress in your bucket. But you can take stress out of the bucket by doing something like going for a run, right? Like it does have that mental health impact where it can relieve some stress. Or, having a great conversation with friends can open the valve and get some stress out of the bucket. So as long as we are opening the valve and letting the stress out, we can take more stress in. So we just got to make sure we're out opening that valve. And I think where we get ourselves in trouble is when we're just aiming to not overflow the stress bucket. But really, we want to keep the stress low enough that we can handle the impact of a big stressor. So if I want to do a big workout this weekend, I can't just be almost overflowing. my stress bucket has to be low enough that I can handle 20 miles, right? So it's not just about keeping ourselves from overflowing. It's about keeping that stress bucket manageable. So I'm not against stress. Like, I think it's great. I think it's important. I'm all about the big workouts, the big stressors, but how are we mindfully opening that valve and letting stress out? And again, the same stress we put in, physical, mental, emotional, that's how stress comes out. So your physical stress, like it could be a run that you're putting in, and you could have work stress as the mental stress. You could have a fight with your partner, be emotional stress. And then maybe we're seeing things like injury, irritability, inability to sleep, difficulty concentrating and focusing. So stress is going to come out. The same kind of stress that you're putting in is the same way that we're going to see it kind of overflowing.
I see. Okay. Thank you for sharing some of those like signs and symptoms that people might be going through where perhaps their stress bucket is overfilling. And I love how that you did tie that to injuries. And I know our mutual friend, Brooke Zarnecki, who we actually connected through, she talks about this from the standpoint of like underfueling as that being kind of a risk factor for injuries. I like how you're kind of talking about the mental side of things and how stress, whether it is just emotional stress, right, could lead to increasing your risk of injuries because you're putting physical stress on your body through training, through strength training, doing those long runs, doing the speed workouts, right? That can be a factor, which I think a lot of people forget about. They might think, okay, well, I wasn't doing my stretching and I wasn't doing my foam rolling, so that's why I got injured. Or I lifted too heavy in the gym, that's why I got injured. And we forget about these other elements, whether it's the nutrition or kind of the personal stresses that someone's going through. And I actually haven't shared this publicly yet. So this will be the first time that I'm sharing this on the podcast, but I actually just went through a bout of the only time that I've ever had to stop running since my adult onset running journey started 13 years ago. Because typically most of the overuse injuries, things that I've kind of created my business around, and why I do what I do today in helping runners get over like Achilles tendon pain, proximal hamstring tendinopathy, IT band issues, is most of these injuries, you don't need to stop running in order to heal from these injuries. And I actually just went through a whole career change myself in the spring that I shared on the podcast, where I was full-time faculty and, teaching a physical therapy program, and really decided to double down on my passion in doing what I do today. And that personal stresses of me making that career change, kind of quote unquote throwing away, the 6 years of going back for my PhD, DPT, as a PT already out there in the world treating patients, and going into this, it did create personal stresses, and I was still training hard, right? Like trying to run a fast half marathon. And unfortunately, I did wind up getting a tear in my plantar fascia and having a partial tear that I couldn't run through. So I just recently went through exactly what you're talking about, which, reflecting on it now, I knew all of that was happening at the time. And it made sense to me that why did this occur is because my stress bucket, even though it was good stresses in that I was making a positive career decision, a better, life for myself personally going forward, and not, juggling 2 full-time jobs anymore. And, better life for my family and all of that. It still was a big change in my life, right? It was a big, huge identity shift of, being in this faculty role, to now being just quote unquote just an entrepreneur, and obviously putting risk involved in that as well. But it is just wild at how all of those pieces are going to affect our body, our tissues. And for those that have these common running related injuries, this stuff matters. And it's so important for us to keep that in mind. And I kind of knew that already, where I've always strategically planned my marathons around, okay, when is the least stressful time period? It was always like, what is my lowest teaching load semester? That's how I used to plan my marathons. Or when are my girls, travel volleyball season at its lowest point, right? Where I'm not, trying to do hard runs, getting 4 or 5 hours of sleep. We're traveling all these different cities. So I've kind of did a good job with that aspect. But yeah, this spring, unfortunately, I got nailed. It hit me. It got me.
Well, and I think I will share my most recent injury was also life stress. Where I was not increasing my training load. I was running very low mileage, but like manageable and like maintaining. So it wasn't, I didn't get injured because I was running too intermittently, but I had life stress. And when I got injured, I was so frustrated. I was talking to my PT. I'm like, I don't get it. I have not increased my training. Like I've been doing the right things. And he said, Sarah, your life is chaotic right now. There's so much going on. It was stress. And it's like, oh my gosh, I do this for a living. I talk about this all the time. And I just thought that, well, I'm not training for anything there. I'm managing it. And it's like, no, you're not, and you're still using running maybe as the place to burn off your stress or whatever it is. And so let's just normalize for everybody listening that this stuff's hard, even for those of us who know and have awareness around it and are looking for it and thinking about it all the time. It's really hard. So yeah, you're not alone in that.
Yeah. And that was like a very similar situation to me, where I do think probably peaking for my race and running a hard race played a factor. But at the time when I really started feeling pain, it was, doctor, my PT, everyone, you were saying like, and I'm like, no, this is like the easiest training that I've had. I've been pretty much, managing like baseline mileage is like lowest throughout my year. Speed work, it's not like I've done longest long run that I've never done before. And I was kind of thinking the same thing and trying to just look at the physical aspect of training and being like, well, this is like nothing for me, right? Like quote unquote nothing. This isn't the hardest training at all. So it like didn't make sense, because I was like, it's not a training error, right? And why this happened. Like, why would my fascia just decide to like, go and rip, it's not because I was running too fast or running too long. So it is interesting. And I do think there's definitely an element of like a couple weeks after we peak in training as well, that it kind of like hits us. But I love how you describe that kind of just overloading the bucket and we're not releasing any of that valve. So I guess that's like a good segue into like, how do we release that valve? Like, how do we manage stress and mitigate like the negative impacts that stress puts on our bodies and our minds?
Yeah. So there are a number of domains of self-care that we want to think about. So with running, typically there's the physical, right? And again, we talk about running can be both a physical stressor and it supports us physically. So there's that, there's both and, but things like sleeping, getting a massage, putting your legs up the wall, actually taking a rest day and resting on your rest day, and letting your body eating well, like eating to both fuel and to recover. That's supporting yourself physically, supporting yourself emotionally. So doing things like watching funny movies. So like feeling a range of emotions. So feeling joy, feeling humor, letting yourself laugh, journaling or processing emotions that maybe you otherwise don't want to feel. So it is self-care to cry and to feel uncomfortable things too. Do it like writing, I said, journaling, writing letters, doing things like a voice memo to yourself where you're just processing your feelings can be really helpful. There's psychological self-care or mental self-care. So things like doing crossword puzzles and reading and learning new things and just being interested in things, sort of like being curious and allowing yourself to learn. Social self-care. So that's things like connecting with friends and making space for people that you love and making time for people that you love, which I think as runners, when we get deep into training, maybe that people that we love might tell us that's a area we can improve upon. I'm sure a lot of people hear from partners and friends that they don't see them so much during peak training. So that social piece. And then spiritual, so being connected to something bigger. So this could be a religious practice, but it could also be like volunteering, feeling connected to humanity and to a greater purpose outside of yourself. So there are a number of things you can do, and really all of it is about being intentional about like, what do you need? And it really all starts with self-awareness, because what one person needs and what works for one person is not what another person needs and what's going to work for somebody else. So one person might have a lot of social needs, and they could do many social activities and still feel like that part of their self-care isn't fulfilled. And then somebody else is like, that was one thing this month, and that was plenty of social interaction for me. I'm good until next month, right? And so it really starts with some reflection. I have a thing on my website, which I think is free. It's a free download that has a self-care assessment and walks you through each of these domains, saying, how am I doing right now? Am I taking care of myself physically? Am I taking care of myself emotionally? How often? And do I need to do more of this? And then give some strategies for doing it. So I really encourage people to really take the time to reflect and think about all of our different needs. We don't just have, it's not just about being fit and healthy, right? We have more needs than that.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those different domains and kind of talking about that, you might need more in one domain than you might need in the other. I love definitely that you brought up sleep, because that's like the low-hanging fruit, right? Like, we all need more. It's free. Everyone can do it. It's usually the thing that I find is first lacking because we are in this, unfortunately, hustle culture, so to speak, right? Where we always want to do more. We always want to get better. We always want to, right? There's always one more thing to do. And this is an area that, I'm slowly chipping away at improving upon. But it is one of those areas that starting there is going to help, mitigate some of those negative impacts of stress. So I love that you mentioned that. The other one that I really enjoy doing myself is journaling, and being able to end every single day with journaling, being able to start every single day with journaling, set intentions for the day, affirmations, reflect at the end of the day. I found that that's been super helpful in making sure my mind's not racing when my head hits the pillow and I'm not thinking about what I didn't do today or what I could have done better or what do I have to do tomorrow. Just getting it out on paper has been super helpful. And that I found that really helps from a stress standpoint. And is that the same, like some of those examples that you mentioned, is that a form of like a coping strategy?
So we think about the way I like to think about it. So those strategies that I just talked about, those self-care strategies are like preventative, right? So these are the things that we're doing. This is like eating your vegetables and like brushing your teeth and like doing the things that you're supposed to do to like take care of your body, right? We're just doing these things to take care of our brain and take care of our whole selves. And then coping skills are like the things that you do like when you're sick, like when the bucket's already overflowing and you need to quickly like get that valve to let a ton of stress out, right? Or the things that you would be doing if like, when we think about the physical comparison, like instead of preventative, it's like, okay, I'm already like, I've got the flu, I need to take my medicine, right? So
Got it. Or
Coping
you got
skills.
your injury and now you're like in the PT's office.
Exactly. So coping
Okay. All
skills
right.
are like, I want to feel so coping skills. Now here's the thing though. Coping skills are just going to help you feel better in the moment. They're not going to like solve the bigger stress problem at hand. So coping skills are, if you want to think about yourself sort of being like over what your butt, like I said, your bucket's overflowing, you're overwhelmed, and you just need to be able to get to a place where you can take a deep breath and figure out how to take your next step forward. That's what the coping skill is. So a coping skill is not going to clear the path forward, but it's going to get you to a place where you can be responding instead of reacting and making an intentional path forward.
Okay. I like this. This is like, I could think of parallels between like physical injuries here. So this would be like the step of a short-term fix, or like going to your medical provider, maybe getting the diagnosis, maybe getting a plan, or getting those quick alleviating strategies to decrease pain or decrease swelling, whether it's ice or whatever medication or whatever manual therapy technique. Okay, so I'm seeing some parallels here. So what are the differences between like helpful and unhelpful coping strategies?
So I think a really primary way to think about it is that a coping skill that's actually helpful is going to make you experience the discomfort. And a coping skill that's unhelpful is helping you avoid the discomfort. So an unhelpful skill would be something like drinking, right? Something that is a distraction that's sort of numbing the intensity of your feeling, that's helping you to not feel or think about what you were. So maybe controlling around eating or binge eating, both of those can be ways that we avoid particular feelings and put all of our attention onto eating, and really are avoiding something else. And then a helpful coping skill would be like a mindfulness technique, or something where we're breathing and getting into our body. And we don't like to do that because it's uncomfortable in our body if we're feeling scared or we're feeling angry or something, right? So we distract away from that. But a helpful, so breathing techniques, mindfulness, grounding skills. So a kind of popular one is the 5-4-3-2-1 technique. And what you would do here is pause and then either look around your environment and find 5 things you can see, 4 things you can hear, 3 things you can smell, 2 things you can touch, something you can taste. And that's getting you out of your head and into your body, which is, again, instead of avoiding, getting you experiencing that discomfort. Sometimes that's too uncomfortable. And what is better is looking in the environment and maybe looking for colors. So 5 red things, 4 blue things, 3 green things. And that's not forcing you to get into your body, but it is getting you out of your head and into the environment, which can be helpful. So that's a grounding technique. And that's really good if you're sort of spiraling, like ruminating on thoughts that are unhelpful, and which is a really common thing to kind of think our feelings. Then we are trying to problem solve and we're thinking of all these worst case scenarios. And that's really just some anxiety in our body that needs attention. So if we can focus that attention and let it be expressed, it's going to go away. And instead we're drinking or I know unhelpful coping skills, but I of course can't think of them in the moment. Or going out for like a super hard run when we're just supposed to have a short run, right? And just like trying to avoid something at all costs. If we do that, those things are still there. And they're just going to come up later in these bigger, more uncomfortable ways, right? So the best thing to do is really face the feeling or the thing head on.
Right. No, I think that is probably, one of those things that many runners might be able to relate to or have noticed they've done that in the past. Or, I've seen people share or post or whatever, maybe it was an athlete that I've worked with before where, the goal of that day, the goal of the training plan for that week was a nice easy run. And they went out and just ran it, a minute or two faster than an easy run. And because they needed to blow off some stress, all right, or they needed to feel better. And they thought, doing that. But I could see what where you're saying is they're basically avoiding, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sitting in those feelings or addressing the elephant in the room or addressing whatever conflict is going on in their life. And they're channeling it into, even though it's maybe not drinking alcohol or doing drugs or something bad, and they're doing it with a good habit of running, it might be quote unquote bad because now it's going to lead to overtraining or avoiding, right? Like what they actually need to address with their feelings or thoughts. And, as we kind of mentioned before, could possibly leave them into that overtraining bucket, increasing stress, and everything's overflowing at that point. Okay, so does that make sense between like negative and positive? And then as you were talking about some of those like positive coping strategies, one that I found, and it really took me a while, honestly, and I like how you kind of gave different levels, because to me it was kind of like I always had that I guess stigma of like yoga and meditation of like, hey, I'm not Zen, I'm not like an earthy person, and that's whatever, fluff. And it's like, that's like the stigma I had around it until I started doing it and, seeing the benefits. And you're right, though, like literally, it was hard for me to sit and do a guided meditation for 5 minutes because I would just be distracted, or I couldn't focus, or I couldn't. But going into those five senses, like you mentioned, can be super helpful. And it's like amazing how it does make you it grounds you, and it just kind of resets almost. It kind of reboots the system, so to speak, where, sometimes I have to schedule it in my day where I know if I have a very busy day with a lot of mental stimulation, brain power that's required, then I will say, okay, Duane, during this 5 or 10 minute block, like you are going to do some meditation to just reset, because if not, then my brain's on like overdrive and I can't perform the way I want to, or I can't be like in the moment as I need to be. So I love that you shared some of those kind of helpful coping strategies. Is this something that you find in runners or clients that you work with? I would imagine, and for me, it's been a whole journey, right? And trying to implement these myself, these kind of self-care, strategies or tips for like mental health. How do we get it to stick? Like, what are some of the recommendations that you give on allowing someone to start to integrate this into their life and get some consistency? Because as we know, just like training and running, and consistency is key, right? In mastering anything. What do you recommend in getting it to stick?
Yeah, I think it's exactly the same stuff that you think of with running. It's, not one thing at a time. It's one thing at a time. So if we think about New Year's resolutions, right, most people don't stick to them. And if you were to set 3 New Year's resolutions, you're probably not going to get anywhere, right? Like that's the likelihood. I mean, you don't hear of anybody setting and sticking to 3 New Year's resolutions, or if you do, it's like a big deal because that's so challenging, right? So set yourself up for success by asking for one thing, and then not aiming for perfection, right? So another reason that New Year's resolutions fail is because people say, okay, I'm going to eat, nothing for 7 straight days. And then on the 4th day, they give in and they eat a cupcake and they're like, well, screw that, I messed up. So now I'm going to just binge for the next 3 days. So if we say, okay, most days this week, I will try to practice gratitude before I go to sleep, right? Then if you forget for a day, that's okay. Try again tomorrow. And there's no shame with it. It's just like the next day, right? So I think we think, oh, to set up a habit, I have to be like very disciplined. It has to be the same exact thing every day, and I can't ever mess up. And that's what it looks like. But actually, when we have compassion, when we're flexible with ourselves, when we give ourselves one goal and have some flexibility around, we actually can be more successful. So the big things are, not setting yourself up to fail, and then celebrating every time you do it. Put a big check mark on your calendar, tell somebody about it, give yourself a pat on the back, make that a conscious celebration of you taking care of yourself and doing what you're supposed to do. And then things like triggering a reminder, so setting an alarm, a visual cue, an accountability partner, anything that's going to help you remember that you have to do it, and give you that like extra motivation to follow through.
Yeah, no, that's been helpful for me too with reading and winding down at night as well, with that bedtime routine. When I see my wife take out her book and I'm like, okay, Duane, like we gotta, right, like the accountability partner aspect of that can be super helpful. All right, so those are some great tips, and I love that I've started implementing some of those, so I'm on the right track here, which is good. And since this is the Healthy Runner podcast, I do need to ask you, because you did mention about you kind of currently going through an injury, and like you personally have navigated your own fair share of injuries. You've helped many runners who have been through injuries, and so kind of in your personal and professional experience, what can a runner do now who is healthy and they're not battling an injury, do to prepare for an injury in the future?
So I think two things. One, diversify your identity, and two, diversify your mental skills toolkit and your strategies. So first, if your entire identity is running and then you lose access to running, that's a really big challenge. And that's when we see runners really struggle to have a productive recovery process. It can be really a lot more emotional stress when they've lost their identity. So taking different classes, or just exploring different interests in different parts of yourself now, all the time. Don't just run and don't just hang out with runners, but really aim to have a diverse identity. And then diversify that mental self-care toolkit. Again, if you lose running and that's it, I take care of my physical self through running, my social self through running. I take care of my emotional self through running. Okay, well, you've just lost running. Now what? So right now, start adding some things to that toolkit. Start doing other things that support your mental health. And then if you lose running, that's just one tool you're losing. You're not losing everything.
Man, and I found that actually most helpful for me, as I mentioned, going through this first time ever, like not being able to run. And I was talking with my coaching team. We're on our call, and I shared with them, what I was going through. And this was literally 1 or 2 weeks into it. So it was like very fresh. Like now I feel like I'm now coming out the other, side of it, where I'm a little more reflective. But they were really fascinated in how my mindset was, and that it wasn't like, oh my goodness, like, this like dramatic thing that I wasn't able to run. And that's like, yes, that's kind of my identity. Like I'm a running physical therapist and coach, and I have a running podcast, and right. Like, I preach health and wellness and, running for longevity. But that's something that I really picked up on in the book Master of Change by Brad Stolberg.
Mm-hmm.
He talks about having all these different rooms in your house, and that you need to be able to attend to your rooms and not forget about a room. Like there might be times when it's a, stressful time at work and you got to do some more projects and you're spending a little more time there. But at the same time, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, or all your identity in one basket, where it's only about running. You're only focusing on running goals. That's all you are as a runner. But if you make sure that you're not neglecting any of the other rooms when running isn't a part of your life, like it wasn't, for mine for 6 weeks, you don't have this like big breakdown because you've kept up the other rooms in your house, so to speak, where it's not like your full identity. And I'm still a dad, right? I'm still a husband, and I still have, a family. I still have a team. I still have clients that I'm enjoying seeing their running success, right? And them recovering from injuries. So I love how you said like diversify. And I really think about that in terms of like those rooms of the house, as Brad talked about in his book, which was super helpful for me as I read that going through my big change in my careers. And I think that really helped me cope with this injury that I did get, because it was so shocking to me that it happened, where it didn't, I didn't like spiral out into a deep state of depression, or, really had trouble like navigating the rest of my life because I wasn't able to run. So I love how you kind of mentioned that. It brought me back to some of Brad's work. Have you ever read any of Brad Stolberg's books at all? Yeah.
Yeah, I actually almost just quoted him when I was talking about not having too many goals at once, because he says happiness is the present moment minus expectations. So I think a lot about setting yourself up with realistic expectations. And,
Yes.
that piece of if I'm telling myself I'm going to be perfect, then I'm not happy when I only, hit 75% of the days I was going to practice mindfulness or whatever. But if I set myself up with realistic expectations, I'll feel a lot happier.
Yes, yes, I love it. And at the time of release of this episode, this is going to be released on October 10th, which is World Mental Health Day. So I'm curious, in your line of work and your clinical experience, and for what you do in helping the running community, what does this World Mental Health Day mean to you?
To me, it's just such an important opportunity to remind everybody that all humans have mental health, just like all humans have health. We think of mental health and we think of mental illness, right? But our mental health is just like physical health. It is on a spectrum. Sometimes we're healthy, and there might be periods in our life where we have an acute illness. And we might one day find out we have a chronic illness that we have to face the rest of our lives. And that can be true for both physical and mental illness. And so I think this day really allows us to remember this is something that affects everybody. And just because you have your mental health today doesn't mean you don't have to think about it. You might be physically healthy today. You're still doing things to protect your health and stay healthy. And if you have your mental health today, you still want to protect your mental health and prioritize that mental health. And so, I think just reducing that stigma, drawing awareness to how important it is, how much like your brain is part of your body, it's connected to everything, and it deserves your attention. And you don't have to be in a crisis or be experiencing a mental illness to want to take care of your mental health.
So I just loved your answer, because you've talked about how it is very similar to physical health, and your answer was actually somewhat, it was definitely unique in how you answered it, but I did see some parallels to our latest guest, Jenny, in episode 286 on the podcast, or 246, I should say, on the podcast, who gave her take in a similar way, is that we do need to normalize this stigma, and that it's not only illness. And I like how you kind of talked about it from like a preventative standpoint, and that we always have mental health and we should always be mindful of it. And, thinking about some of like the strategies that you talked about today, that we could implement and work on that mental health. I loved that answer. And we need to get that out to more people. So hopefully this episode does that, right? And kind of bring some awareness to that. And really, as we come down the final stretch here, which is the last question that we ask all our guests, it's always a misconception question. So, if you could change one thing about the misconception of mental health and running, what would that be?
That the brain is separate from the body, and that we can ignore the brain, and that just focusing on the physical stuff is enough, right? The brain is part of the body. We don't leave the brain at home and go on our workouts. We bring the brain with us, which means every mile that we run, the brain is there getting the stress of those miles. So the brain's going to get the impact from that workout, and whatever state the brain is in when it comes with us on that run is going to be impacting our workout. So if the brain is fatigued and stressed and overwhelmed, it's going to be bringing that into the workout, and we're not going to get much out of the workout. So taking care of our mental health heavily impacts what we're able to bring to the workout, what we're getting out of the workout, what we're able to bring to race day. They are connected. And so, yeah, the misconception would be that they're separate.
Yeah, they're all connected. And guys, mental health is so much more than going for therapy, right? Quote unquote therapy. And maintaining strong mental health is key for growing in your running journey. And I hope you all learned that today. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today on the show, Sarah. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation.
Oh, it was. And I appreciate you guys for listening to this conversation. So whether you're listening to this on the Healthy Runner podcast or the Spark Healthy Runner YouTube channel, if you found this helpful and you know a runner who this could probably help, just copy the link, share it with them, shoot them a text, shoot them a DM, and have them listen to this, because I really enjoyed this conversation with Sarah, and I hope you did as well. And hopefully it can help reframe how you look at mental health and how you really kind of double down in that mindset bucket in growing in your own running journey. As always, guys, let's maintain a strong mind, a strong body, and let's just keep on running. Until next time.